In 2020, when the pandemic hit, Congress and the Trump administration moved quickly to get out trillions of dollars in economic aid to businesses in need of support as the country shut down. But with that lifeline of aid came widespread fraud, with federal watchdogs now estimating it could exceed $100 billion. So tonight, our senior congressional correspondent Rachel Scott follows up on efforts to crack down on COVID funding fraud and help its many victims as part of her series, Through the Cracks.
This guy, according to federal prosecutors, filed for millions of dollars in federal aid, got it, and then went Lamborghini shopping.
It's considered the biggest fraud in a generation.
Your tax money tonight, a pastor and his son facing charges for allegedly stealing more than $8 million in federal money, COVID relief funds.
Many of them simply wrote down names of fake businesses on their applications, and some even applied for the loans while sitting in jail.
Scammers stealing billions of dollars meant to help struggling Americans during the pandemic, ripping off the American taxpayer, buying mansions, flashy cars, and luxury yachts. But behind the fraud are real victims, real people now paying the price. Here in Florida, fraudsters applied for disaster relief loans, claiming to own 2 farms at this suburban gated community in sunny Palm City.
I don't have a loan, and obviously I don't have a farm.
Donna and Richard Lowe have been living here for 32 years and are currently on the hook for paying back nearly $100,000 in loans they say they never took out for a farm they don't own and that doesn't even exist.
And I kind of just thought, like, you get stuff in the mail every day. You know, you're approved for this loan. I never even heard of the SBA because it's not a world that I needed to think about. And so I was just like, yeah, okay, I don't need another loan, ripped it up.
The Lowe's have received countless letters from the Small Business Administration demanding repayment.
Our IDs were stolen by someone who took out 2 SBA loans, one in my name and one in Donna's name. Those SBA loans have caused the government to hound us to repay this debt that is not ours, although we notified them 2 years ago.
When the pandemic hit, struggling small business owners turned to government relief programs passed by Congress under the Trump administration. One of those programs allowed business owners to take out economic injury disaster loans, or EIDL, which now have to be paid back. So if someone took out EIDL funds in your name, as of now, you are responsible for it.
Thank you for contacting the Small Business Administration Customer Service. My name is Rachel.
The Lowe's started calling the federal government in 2020 to tell officials they were victims of fraud.
Hello, Rachel. My name is Richard Lowe, L-O-E-W.
2.5 years later, they are still calling, looking for answers.
This is not my loan. I have been sent hundreds of collection letters from the SBA for 2 loans that are not mine. In the file, it says there is an investigation.
Correct, yes. It's been flagged for fraud or ID theft.
While the loan is being investigated, the Lowe's say they've received letters from the SBA for years, like this one, warning of a lawsuit, garnishing of wages, and an impact on their credit score if a payment is not made.
What recourse do I have if they're not my loans and they're going to garnish my retirement funds?
What will happen is, Mr. Lowe, I will send an email over to the loan specialist.
The Lowe's are not the only victims of this fake farm scheme.
Someone stole my identity and got a loan for almost $50,000.
Somebody had used our identity and my identity to secure $150,000.
The loan was for $92,500 and it was for my livestock farm. I don't have a livestock farm.
It's really hard to sleep at night when you have that kind of debt hanging over your head.
It really went from like, oh, this is just a simple mistake, it's an oversight, it'll be corrected, to a lot of frustration and anger that how can this happen to me and why?
As COVID-19 spread and the country shut down, Congress approved the largest stimulus package in history, the $2 trillion CARES Act, a lifeline to businesses, hospitals, and local governments on the verge of economic ruin. 3 years later, top watchdogs are still cracking down on scammers who took advantage of government aid.
Do we have any idea what the scope is of the fraud?
We're still chasing the money and following the fraud. And so at this point, 3 years out, I can't say definitively how much fraud there actually was.
Michael Horowitz is leading the team of independent watchdogs, tracking trillions in pandemic relief.
I think for the American people, they're sitting at home and they're wondering, how did this happen?
A decision was made at the outset of the pandemic. Speed was the key. We're going to send the money out. We're not going to vet people. And you all, you investigators, you'll go catch it later. Go chase the fraud later. We just want to get the money out. That was a bad choice. It was the wrong choice. Never should have happened.
Horowitz says the Small Business Administration was overwhelmed by the number of loans and ignored key warnings.
What recommendations specifically were ignored?
The Small Business Administration Inspector General, right at the outset of the pandemic, said, stop relying on self-certifications. Check people. Make sure they're real people. We had months and months of that occurring without going back and fully checking people's identities. If you give fraudsters a running start like that, you know, they're way ahead at that point, which is why it's taking us years to figure this out.
ABC News has learned the total amount of fraud, specifically within EIDL, the program that many of those fake farm schemes targeted, could be at least $86 billion.
It seems to me that just a simple check and balance, due diligence, following up, could have just closed that loop quite easily, ruled it out.
People were desperate for help. That's all true. It doesn't mean you can't double check to make sure it's a real business. When you put out that much money and you don't really require much more than filling out a form, it's pretty easy to make things up.
ABC News reviewed several reports from the Inspector General, that independent watchdog overseeing the SBA, and found a troubling pattern. The agency lowered the guardrails in place to handle the tidal wave of COVID relief loans, which significantly increased the risk of fraud. And as all that fraud was unfolding, the agency did not have a system in place to track identity theft complaints or provide updates to victims for at least a year.
What we're seeing is victims are often struggling out there to deal with these problems that were created by others, that the agencies didn't do enough to protect their identities.
The agency has expanded its staff and eventually set up a central email address along with a set of forms for identity theft victims to fill out. But the Lows say they followed that process and have gotten nowhere.
I've written letters to congressmen, I've written letters to senators. I have a file there of over 200 pages of notes stating every time I get a notification that I owe money to the government, I respond. And so far, they haven't responded back.
The SBA says 25,000 people have reached out to report identity theft so far. 8,000 claims have been processed and cleared. 5,000 other claims are currently under review. They also say they've reached out to thousands more who they suspect are victims too. In a statement to ABC News, the agency said it is committed to providing expeditious relief to victims of identity theft and is providing additional reforms to the recourse process. Still, the Lows say they are waiting for action.
It makes me feel like I'm some sort of deadbeat. And the truth is, I worked hard to not be that person.
Still no resolution. Rachel Scott joins us now. Rachel, what are you hearing from the Small Business Administration tonight?
So, Lindsay, we asked the SBA repeatedly about the Lows, and they initially said it was their long-standing policy to not confirm or deny any potential cases of identity theft. But after a preview of this piece aired over the weekend, an official followed up with us and said that they have finally reached out to the Lows. And we know that there are lots of people out there that could be just like them. That federal watchdog that we spoke to recently found that the government handed out $5.4 billion to nearly 70,000 applicants with questionable Social Security numbers. And officials are warning some Americans could be victims and not even know it yet. The repayment period just started up last October for those EIDL loans, which means many more people are just finding out their identities were mixed up in all of this mess, Lindsay.
I'm sure the Lows are just the tip of the iceberg, but finally they're getting some action. What more can the Biden administration do to help victims like them?
Well, in March of last year, the Biden administration promised to announce a new executive order in the coming weeks to support victims of identity theft, but that still has not happened yet. The administration tells us that it will come soon, and it would seek to boost SBA resources to tackle fraud. They're also calling on Congress to provide $1.6 billion that would triple DOJ efforts to investigate fraud, enhance websites to make a one-stop shop for fraud victims, and pilot a system that could also warn people when their identities are used. But as of now, it's not clear if that proposal would even pass in Congress, Lindsay.
Rachel Scott, so appreciate the work you're doing on this, Rachel, and we know that you will continue to stay on top of this.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.